What I'm about to tell you is something I'd rather forget, but some things never really let you go. When I was 12, I had to stay at my cousin Damien's house for a few nights. His parents were away on a trip, and my mom thought it would be a good idea for me to stay over so he wouldn't be alone. I didn't mind. Damien and I got along well, and he had a huge basement with a game room. His house was old, but I had never thought there was anything wrong with it. Until that first night. Everything was normal. We played video games until late at night, ate chips, and laughed at stupid jokes. Around 1 a.m., we decided to go to bed. Damien slept in his own bed, and I had an air mattress on the floor. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, but something felt wrong. The room was dark except for a faint orange glow from the streetlight outside. I heard a soft rustling noise, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. My eyes drifted toward the closet in the corner of the room. The door was slightly open. I was sure Damien had closed it before we went to sleep. I turned onto my side, my back facing the closet, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the wind had pushed it open. But there was no wind. The windows were shut. And then I heard it again. A scratching, scraping sound, like something dragging its nails across the wooden panels inside the closet. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head and looked at the closet. The door was open wider. My heart pounded. There was no reason for the door to move by itself. I tried to stay still, but my body was frozen with fear. Then I saw it. Two glistening eyes in the darkness of the closet. They weren't large, but they shone, reflecting the dim light in the room. And they were looking right at me. My breathing became unsteady. I didn't dare move. I wanted to wake Damien, but I couldn't make a sound. My voice was gone. Slowly, the door moved again. Not fast, not with a sudden swing, but slowly, deliberately, as if someone, wanted me to keep watching. And then I saw it. A hand, longer than a normal human hand with thin, bony fingers and sharp black nails. The skin was grayish, almost scaly, like something dead. The fingers gripped the edge of the door and pulled it open even further. I felt panic rising. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as that thing emerged from the closet. It was tall, gaunt. Its face was half hidden in the shadows, but I could make out its features. A narrow jawline, a mouth just a bit too wide, and eyes that didn't blink. Its chest barely moved, as if it wasn't really breathing. And it was staring at me. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear. Maybe a minute, maybe longer. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A whisper. It didn't come from Damien. He was still facing away from me, breathing steadily. It came from it. Its lips barely moved, but I heard it. A soft, clicking whisper, like it was saying my name, but in a way that wasn't human. Then it moved. It leaned forward as if it wanted to get closer. And that was the moment my body finally reacted. I threw my blanket off and lunged toward Damien, shaking him violently. He woke up with a startled yell, just in time to hear the closet door slam shut. We both stared at the closet. The door was closed again. My whole body was shaking. I could barely breathe. "Dude, what's wrong?" Damien mumbled, still half asleep. I couldn't tell him. I could only stare at that closet, waiting, listening. But it stayed silent. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told Damien everything. At first, he laughed it off, saying I must have had a nightmare. But when I asked if he had left the closet door open, his face suddenly changed. "No," he said. "I always close that door. Always." He tried to joke about it, but I saw the tension in his eyes. That night, I slept on the couch downstairs. And the closet, it stayed shut. But sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. What if I had waited until it was really close? Maybe I was never supposed to see it. Maybe it still sees me. A group of friends, Laura, Tom, Emma, and Tim, decided to get away for a weekend camping trip in a remote forest, far from the bustle of everyday life. They hoped for a peaceful escape, surrounded by nature and away from the noise of the world. The forest, however, had a different plan. After a long drive, they arrived at their destination, an isolated campsite beside a large, dark lake. The trees around them were towering and dense, casting long, shadowy shapes that seemed to move even without the wind. Despite the eerie atmosphere, they set up their tents, laughing and joking, hoping to ignore the strange feeling in the air. But deep down, they all sensed something was not quite right. The night fell quickly, and as the stars began to twinkle overhead, the group gathered around a fire to tell stories. The crackling flames illuminated their faces, and their voices echoed through the empty woods. It was all fun and games until a sudden sound broke the calm, a sharp crack of a branch coming from somewhere deep in the forest. "Probably just an animal," Tom said, laughing off the tension. But even as he spoke, a cold chill swept through the camp, and the others fell silent, each of them listening intently. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, but there was something else. A sound, distant, faint, like whispers carried on the breeze. At first, they thought it was the wind, but it was too distinct, too intentional. Laura's eyes widened as she listened. "Do you hear that?" The others nodded, uneasy. It was almost as if the voices were calling them, but when they looked around, they saw nothing. Just the black expanse of the forest stretching out endlessly. "Maybe we should go for a walk," Tom suggested, trying to make light of the situation. "Clear our heads." Reluctantly, the group agreed. They grabbed flashlights and ventured into the dark forest, the trees closing in around them like a maze. With each step, the forest grew quieter, the sounds of the night vanishing as though something was silencing the woods. Only the soft, distant whispers remained, growing steadily louder. They walked for what felt like hours, the path winding deeper into the woods, but it seemed to lead nowhere. Emma's nerves were on edge. "This doesn't feel right," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll be fine," Tim reassured her, but his own voice lacked conviction. He could feel it too, the oppressive weight of the forest, as if the trees were watching them, waiting for something. Then, out of the darkness, they saw something. An old, decaying house, almost completely hidden by the trees. The sight of it made Laura's stomach drop. It didn't belong here, not in the middle of the forest. It was as though the house had been abandoned for decades. "I don't know about this," Laura said, but Tom pushed the door open, as if compelled by an unseen force. The group followed him, stepping cautiously inside. The air inside the house was stale, the heavy scent of rot and mold filling their noses. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the wooden floor creaked beneath their feet. It was as if the house had been forgotten by time itself. In one corner of the room, they found an old wooden box covered in dust and cobwebs. Tim, always the curious one, knelt down and opened it slowly. Inside was a thick, ancient book. It was bound in what looked like leather, and its surface was covered with strange, twisted symbols. When he touched it, the room seemed to grow colder, the air thickening as if the house itself was waking up. The moment Tim opened the book, the entire room shifted. The symbols on the pages began to move, rearranging themselves into words that didn't make sense, as if the language itself was changing before their eyes. A sudden violent crash echoed through the house, and the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. A low, haunting laugh filled the air, cold and hollow. Then came the sound of children laughing, but there was something wrong about it. The laughter was too high-pitched, too twisted, as though it came from somewhere deep within the earth. The friends froze, the fear sinking in. "We need to get out of here," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. They ran for the door, but as they reached it, something stopped them. The forest outside had changed. The trees were no longer just trees. They were closer, almost suffocating them. The path they had followed was gone, swallowed up by the thick underbrush. The woods were alive, shifting and closing in around them. "Where's the campsite?" Tim asked, panic rising in his voice. "We need to go back." But there was no sign of the campsite. The tents, the fire, everything had vanished. The woods stretched on endlessly in all directions. The air was thick with whispers now, louder and more insistent, as though the forest was calling to them, urging them to stay. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, tall, shadowy, standing at the edge of the trees.